Welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Today we're joined by Nick Musica. He's the founder and CEO of Optics In, which is a small boutique SEO agency. But we're talking about his time as the SEO and Content Director at a very, very large website, dmv.org. So he joined dmv.org back in 2012. And at the time, they were generating 85 million page views a year. You heard me right. 85 million page views a year. And he got them to the point where they were generating 185 million page views per year in 2018 when he subsequently left. So we get to deep dive into the journey that Nick took this website on. He starts by sharing about how basically the first year or so was spent just untangling and fixing technical website mistakes that he found. Obviously, technical SEO takes on a whole different meaning with a website that size. And so he shares a lot of the different things he had to do to clean up some technical problems. We get into the weeds on canonicalization and 301s, 404s, all the different technical areas you might find on a site. We talk a lot about site architecture. If you want to hear more about subdomain versus subfoldering, crawl budget, Google Search Console errors and how to understand that, we really get into the weeds on it. It's really fun because we haven't gotten in depth on some of these topics on the podcast, at least not in a very long time. We also talk a lot about the types of content that they were producing, how they identified thin content, what they did to go back in and fix that. And then monetization, obviously a website with that kind of traffic has a lot of opportunities for monetization. We kind of hear his insights on what was working, where they put their time and attention, how they tested different results and such. Towards the end of the interview, we hear about the precipitous fall that this website had only a week after Nick left the organization, why it got such a large drop-off in traffic, and some of the lessons that all of us can learn from what ended up happening during 2019 and beyond to this website. So definitely a lot to learn from that and some super interesting things from Google as it looks at this site and other sites similar to it. All in all, really fun to talk about a website this large and hear the insights of how Nick grew it. So I hope you enjoy. Hey, Jared here. So if you have a website that is not getting organic traffic and needs SEO help, check out Stan Ventures. They are a full-service SEO agency renowned for their professionally managed SEO, blogger outreach, and powerful link building services. They've been helping websites rank their pages higher on Google for more than a decade now. More than 2,500 websites and 100 plus SEO agencies have experienced the true power of Stan Ventures. Their customer reviews mirror the quality of the services that they offer. If you're looking for a trusted SEO partner to do things that can really push your website to the top of Google rankings, look no further. Stan Ventures has your back. Again, they're a full-service SEO agency that can handle your SEO through things like blogger outreach and powerful link building services. Don't wait, you get an exclusive 30% discount on all of their services by clicking on the link in the description below. Welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman. Today we're joined by Nick Musica, with the founder and CEO of Optics In, which is a small SEO agency. But we are talking today about your time formerly as the SEO and the content director at dmv.org. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Jared. Yep. Excited to chat with you and the audience today.
Oh, we have such a good story today. It's going to be really fun. If you like to nerd out on some crazy growth, some crazy website growth on the back of SEO, and then some real drama, perks, pitfalls along the way, some great success along the way. This is a really, really fun story we have in front of us. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on you? I know you're doing an SEO agency right now, but maybe catch us up to your background and obviously we'll pick up the story for your time at the DMV website.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I've been working in SEO since 2003. I co-authored a book with Shari Thoreau in 2009, mapping usability and SEO together. Spent a brief semester at NYU teaching at the graduate level, but most folks know me for the work at DMV.org because of the conversation we're going to have here. But I started my own agency in 2019, right before the pandemic.
Yep.
I found myself sitting alone, talking to myself a lot, with the exception of talking to cats, just before everyone else was.
You, yeah. The thing about starting a business is it's often very lonely, and then COVID is often very lonely as well. You kind of double down on it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so when I saw COVID hitting, my first thought was, "Oh, great! Everyone's going to have to adjust like I did. Let's see how that works out." Yeah, and we have.
It's a good point. I worked from home prior to that, and so when everybody was this whole work from home craze, I was like, if you need any tips, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I am a professional work at homer.
Yeah, yeah. We sounds like we both suffered through it before everyone else did.
So we did. So we did. Well, you got a story background. Why don't you launch us off? And again, if you haven't been, the site we're talking about today is dmv.org, and your time there. You were there quite a while. When did you start with them? And why don't we pick up the conversation there?
Yeah, for sure. So even before I started, the site was registered in 1999. Right. So it's been out for more than a minute. I got there in 2012. So there are multiple iterations between 1999 and 2012. So when I got there, the site was getting approximately 85 million visits a year via SEO. No paid social. I mean, there's not a whole lot of social activity around
Yeah.
getting your license, right? Like there's just not a lot.
Not a lot of
So
selfies being taken in the DMV line, at least not good ones.
right, right. Got my license today. Like not so much. Even kids today just sort of don't really want to get their license like I did minimally. So when I joined the company, there was about 7 full-time employees, W-2s, 1099s, whatever it was, but about 7 of us.
Okay.
And fast forward 6 years later, we went from 85 million to 185 million visits a year, largely through SEO.
Wow.
And literally the week after I left, I got a text from my former manager saying, "So you've been gone for a week, and overnight we lost 40% of our traffic."
Which
So
quantifies in the tens of millions gone overnight.
yeah, so there were multiple rounds of layoffs. And so from the perspective of employment growth, and so folks can do their own math around how much the company was making, right? So imagine, if you will, we went from 7 employees to 40, lost 40%. And I can't confirm or deny this next statistic, but if you go on LinkedIn and start searching around for who's working where, there's probably about 3 full-time employees.
Do you know anything about where the site is today? Is it still, in the millions of page views?
I'm making a guess based on third-party data. I'm making
Yeah.
a guess about 12, yeah, CMrush, let's say 12 to 15 million.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So a rise and a fall. And we'll get into the fall as well, if you
For
want
sure.
some interesting storylines. There's some fun screenshots you shared with me that I think a lot of people will be interested in, but we'll get to that. I mean, when you arrived there, 85 million page views a year. I just did some math on my phone. It's about 7 million page views a month. So that's some serious traffic. Before we get into some of the things that you were a part of that grew the site so dramatically, help us understand the dmv.org website and then its relationship to the DMV. And if you're listening across the globe, the DMV is the United States Department of Motor Vehicles. I think I have that right. And like you said, it's not exactly well loved. Not necessarily their fault, but nobody likes to go and re-register their license, or and they're known for long lines and these sorts of things. What's the website's relationship to the DMV itself, the actual government institution or whatever?
Is zero relationship. If you go to the website, there is, or at least there minimally used to be, a big banner at the top where you would typically find a display ad. But on this website, it was, "We have no relationship with the government at all. This is a privately owned company."
Yep. Okay. So none. Okay. So what was the
None.
goal of this website? Just to help people out with their DMV questions, or what was the foundation of it?
Yeah, my understanding from my time being there, the origin story is, there was a family that registered the domain. Brothers worked together to get traffic. One brother made a bet with another one that he could meet certain metrics, and so he did within some period of time, which I think was half of what they agreed to,
Wow.
and then it took off from there. And to your point, right? So the DMV is sort of the general term for things these days. In New Jersey, for example, it used to be the DMV, now it's the MVC, Motor Vehicle Commission,
Oh,
and every state has an agency, maybe 2 agencies. In California, where I am, there is the DMV. It manages your car and the driver. In Texas, I forget the name of the agencies, but there's one agency for the driver, there's one agency for the car. So it's different. So if you were to move to another state, don't assume it's the DMV. It could be a different agency. But largely, folks search for DMV or an equivalent of that. And we aggregated 50 states together on one website. The idea was make it easier for folks to navigate the things they need to do when they go to the DMV. And arguably, we did that. Regardless of the traffic drop, we did that. I worked with the content folks. We had a great process. We did what we had to do. It was easier to do research and distill the important information down for states such as California, New York, New Jersey, Texas, where there's a budget for the DMV, shall we say. Right? All the information is largely there, most of it. Other states with less of a budget, Alabama, Mississippi, et cetera, don't have as much of a robust website. So we were able to answer the questions better, faster, better organized on the page as much as we were able to by looking at the other websites and rewriting the content and structuring it in a way where it was more findable and easy to understand.
So I guess maybe the first question that comes to my mind as we're talking about this, and maybe you're going to talk about it later, so tell me if you are, but I guess they surround the proverbial legalities of using DMV, for example, in the URL and as the name of the website, and kind of answering these government related queries, if you will. Like, how we talk about trademarks every now and then again in websites, and how that can come back to bite you, how it is often very confusing, to be quite honest with you. What is an active trademark? What isn't? So it kind of just all relates to that bigger question. And how did you guys kind of manage that and talk about that?
Yeah, so I can answer from the perspective during the time frame that I was there.
Right.
And keep in mind, I got there 2012 and it started in 1999. So as far as I know, there was no issue with any lawsuits around the domain name. Not a lawyer. Also,
Totally.
it's all public. It's all public domain information.
Yeah.
It's the government, right? So if you go to census.gov, all that information can be used on your website, structured any way you want to.
Yep.
Create a fun graph because it's typically a big table, right? So it's the same spirit as that. However, this is a little different because dmv.org, even today, if you were to say blah, blah, blah.org with something that sounds official, there's a whole lot of confusion around that. So if you were to take a look at the backlink profile of this website, you can make an argument. And this was one of the conversations internally was, while we try to be clear, we have the banner at the top, we're very clear of who we are from our perspective at the time. We benefited from the confusion.
Mm-hmm.
There's at least one news clip that I can remember where ABC, NBC, whatever it was, and the anchor says, blah, 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 the government website located at dmv.org.
Yep.
Oh, okay. All right. And this is how it happened. Okay. At least from a backlink perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would probably be a bit confused, especially if you talked about it, you have a different budget, you have different people on your team than the state DMV does, and you can probably, over time, as we are seeing, outrank them for a lot of their queries. And one very easily might assume that if they're ranking number one, you got DMV in the name, that's the source.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you were to break down the query types, navigational, informational, and transactional, what some folks call a navigational or branded query, same. We were outranking the state DMV websites on the daily.
Yeah.
On the daily.
So amazing. Well, let's talk about when you got there, and I want to hear some of the nitty gritty on the how you grew this site, how you worked with the team. You had a healthy supply of content writers when you arrived. I think you said you had five or 10 when you got there. And again, that's October 2012 was when you got there, doing about 85 million page views a year at that point. Let's talk about what it looks like to manage a site like that, and kind of what you did to get a handle on what a site like that was doing, because you probably had a period of time where you had to really better understand what that traffic was doing on the site before you could kind of with a plan of attack.
For sure. So I got there and I was focusing on SEO. There was a content director at the time, so I was just the SEO guy. And we had we had three websites, but they were called the website. So there was www.dmv.org, there was local.dmv.org, and there was search.dmv.org, but they were all the website, right? In SEO land, those are three different websites.
Yep.
But when you're technical and managing the domain, it turned into the website. And so that's how it was referred to in some circles for some period of time. And I fully understood what that meant when I made a request for the www site for the canonical tag. And somehow my request landed on the local dot website.
Oh.
What I didn't, right. So here's what I understood after the fact was the robots.txt file and some other like a sitemap were shared files across quote unquote the website.
Going between the subdomains.
Correct. Yeah. So the same robots.txt on www, local dot, and search.dmv.org. So if you said exclude this directory on one, we'll call them a subdomain, it excluded the same directory from the other two.
Bet Google's crawlbot loved that confusion.
Yeah, so here's how that presented. So I made a request for an adjustment to the canonical tag on www. I can't remember what it was, but the result of it was on local is essentially every page got canonicalized to local.dmv.org.
Oh, okay.
Right. So within not good. Not good.
Yeah, if you're new to SEO, that's bad.
Yeah, we essentially said take these 1,000 pages and attribute all of their equity to one page on the website. That was essentially the non-directive, right? Because canonical tag should not be a directive because people screw up their website. Enter Exhibit A. We screw up the website, right? And
oh boy,
we lost traffic overnight. So it goes up and then it goes down, and then it took a while to find because I didn't make the request. So what am I looking for in the changes, week over week from the push? It wasn't the canonical tag. I finally found it. And then I got to learn, oh, this is what we mean collectively as the website. Got it. Now I'm understanding it. So that was a humbling moment.
What did you do to fix all that? I mean, that's amazing you found it, because you're right. Like, that's like looking for a needle in a haystack to some degree, especially when you don't even know what the needle you're looking for is.
Yeah, so there was a big conversation with Dev around what were the shared files across the websites. What does that mean? Let's get them parsed out between the different subdomains, because www.dmv.org needs its own robots.txt, local dot needs its own robots.txt, et cetera. So once we're able to detangle that, we had more solid technical architecture. And so that was step one. Step two was fix the canonical tag on local dot, which wasn't a whole lot of traffic relative to www. However, you still want your traffic back. So it took about 2 weeks at the time once we fixed the canonical tag on local dot for the traffic to start to come back, and it did.
Taking a brief step back, just so people can learn from this.
Sure.
Most people aren't managing websites that are getting millions and millions of page views, but there's a healthy use case here to learn from. I think we all understand to some degree why a site might use architecture where you folder different content or different spaces of the website. So you might have dmv.org/local/ the rest of your URL string. And that can be done to help crawlability, help navigability, help, with dividing the content accurately. Talk about why a website would benefit from having these subdomains versus maybe the approach I just outlined.
Yeah, so and let's take it in the context of dmv.org, and then we can apply it to anything else we want, right? So, and there's also a third piece in there, which is search dot, which we had search results in the search results, which as per Google, not a great idea, right? And sorry,
I keep laughing, but
there were multiple things to fix, which is why we went from 85 to 185 million visits a year, right? It was very good, and we sort of bullied the algorithm to some degree because of 50 states collapsed into one, and because of the confusion with all the links, right? So all that was at play. However, going back to the original question, what's the benefit of a subdomain versus a subfolder, et cetera? For this website, for the size of the website, the cleaner the architecture is, the more thought I would argue you have to give into, is it going to be a subdomain or is it going to be a subdirectory? Also, for www.org, there was a lot of questions. How do I get my license? How do I renew my license? How do I sell a car? Whatever it is. How do I get a title? It's very information centric. Local dot was focused on very specific uh, locations of DMV offices, of insurance agents, things like that. So they were other than a technical concern around the size of the website and the cleanliness of the technical architecture, there was also a question of the audience. Where do these people want to go? If
Right.
you have everything you need and you want to go to the DMV, here's a website. You can go do that. Right. So you have size of website and cleanliness, you have who are these people, what are they trying to accomplish? And then you have the different types of websites. One's an informational website, one's a directory website.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great point to bring up. You'll see that a lot where I suppose you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's intent based, and when the intent is so wildly different, and the size of the site is justifies it, that can be why you would go subdomain versus subfolder.
For sure, for sure. And based on what I've seen, we'll say in the past 5-ish years, folks who are first come to their domain, be it, so take a look at weed maps. I do some amount of work in cannabis and related topics. If you take a look at weed maps, they started as a directory, they piled on products, they piled on information. If you take a look at healing maps, which is more psychedelic in nature, they started with directory and information, right? So it can be done. You don't need to separate those two things out. However, coming in late into the game, if there's more than 3 players in this space, it's going to be a harder time. Or if you're not Yelp, it's going to be a harder time.
Yeah, that's a good point. So these are some of the technical challenges that you were up against. And I mean, I'm just curious, what other tips could you share with us about managing large volumes of traffic and in URLs at scale that all of us can learn from? Obviously, the majority of us aren't touching websites that size, but I already feel like you shared some really amazing little insights about how big small technical things can turn into.
For sure, for sure. So I would say this: my first year and a half there was just cleaning up the technical. That's all it was. 301s were getting cleaned up. If there were 301 loops or chains, they were getting cleaned up. We had interstitial pages when folks were clicking on a link and they were about to go off site. That was a 301. We made a lot of money on car insurance. We also had a lot of car insurance in state result pages. Those were all available to Google. It wasn't necessary. We had my favorite page on the website was snowmobile insurance in Hawaii. Right. Because we had some logic. It was very smart. It was very well done, but also not perfect. So, there was logic where we would have the same topic, then you multiplied out by 51 states. We included DC as a state. But what that meant was snowmobile insurance in all states, including Hawaii. And so my job was not only cleaning up technically, but also trim out this thin content. My nickname by a gentleman who I used to work with for a couple of years was Choppy Chop. We would have project meetings and I would come in there and he's like, "What are we deleting today, Nick?" I'm like, "We're going to find out." And I probably deleted 500 pages. I don't know. I'm making it up at this point. It's been a while, but 500 pages over a year and a half.
What type of content approach had been taken when you got there? You talked about thin pages,
Yeah.
and the fact that you guys learned a lot from car insurance, which I want to get into your monetization angles in a little bit. I mean, was this a website that relied on a lot of informational content to drive its traffic, more transactional pages, or some of these almost programmatically created pages? I'm curious about how this site was almost built from a content structure standpoint.
Yeah, it was one part programmatic in terms of creating topics out. So a topic was driver's license in state, for example, or snowmobile insurance in state in brackets, state as a variable. And then we would write content around it. When I got there, all the content was written. It wasn't great, but it didn't need to be great at the time. There was no
Right.
website like this that existed, and there was enough of good enough content that the results came in. However, this
However,
is right. This is the type of content where, because of the programmatic, there was snowmobile insurance in Hawaii, and that had to get taken out of the off the website. There was also a lot of content that was out of date. Things change. Agency names change. Like I said in the top of the conversation, New Jersey used to be DMV, now it's MVC. License ages change. There was not a quote unquote a graduated license um, 20 years ago. Now there is. There weren't times where you couldn't drive your license at 9 o'clock with kids in the car with a permit.
that's a good
Now
point.
there is, right? Right. So it had to be maintained, which is part of this whole skip fast forwarding to today, this quality content perspective. Are you maintaining your content? If you're not maintaining your content, that's a quality score issue.
A lot of the updating, it sounds like, wasn't happening until you arrived. So you were also kind of championing not just technical updates, but content updates along the way.
Yeah. So at one point, I became the director of content and SEO. So when I first got to the company, there were two or three writers who were going through the content. When I went downstairs in our office and started to manage both content and SEO, there were somewhere between, depending on the day, 7 to 10 folks in content. And we went through every page of the website.
Wow.
The most important pages, aka the ones that were getting traffic, the ones that were getting revenue, and just kept on going down the list.
What does it look like to manage a site that has that much traffic? What are some things that happen on a site that size that maybe smaller sites don't run into? And I'm thinking in terms of, optimizing for page speed when you have so much content on the server. I'm talking about images and all the internal linking and just some of these things that we probably don't even consider at scale.
Yeah, so and we talked about this before we start to record. And the problems you see with a 100-page website are not the ones you're going to see with a 100,000-page website. Right? They're just not. You can have a ton of inefficiencies at 100 pages, and it's sort of okay. You can sort of Google can muddle through your website and figure out what the best pages are as per its algorithm and rank them accordingly. However, at some point, your technical gets to be very, very important. You want that thing streamlined as best as possible, because the time that Google takes to go to 100,000 pages or whatever the magic number is, it's going to have to pick and choose where it spends its time. And if you waste your crawl budget, you just may have taken out 50% of your pages that Google didn't even get to. 100 pages, not so much. Google's going to get through all of them. But that's one of the issues. When we talk about page speed, one of the conversations that we used to have internally, but I don't hear out in the world, I don't think I've ever heard it, is yes, page speed is important. It's one of, are we still saying 200 signals? For argument's sake, we'll say
I've
200
heard
signals.
300 lately.
Okay, all right, 1 to 300 signals, right? But it has to be contextualized. It's you versus your competitors, right? So
Right.
it's not me versus Amazon. I'm not in the business of Amazon. So when we took a look at our site compared to the California DMV, Texas DMV, et cetera, that's how we started to understand how we ranked against those sites from a page speed perspective. And it was late in the game. It was probably 2018 or 2017 when display ads first got on the website. And that's a big hit to page speed.
Yep.
Big hit, right? So we were a private company. We made a lot of money on partnerships and with plugins with JavaScript, for example. State agencies did not. That wasn't their business model. Their page speed was always going to be better, always. So we did what we had to do to make our site the best version of what it was, and ideally, it was close to the page speed of those other websites.
The largest site I've ever worked on, I think, was about 60,000 page views. I have an agency as well, and we don't normally work on sites larger than maybe 5 to 10,000, not page views, sorry, URLs. Sorry, 60,000 URLs. And man, you hit the nail on the head. Like, even just going from a 5,000 URL site to a 60,000 URL site, there's just so many different things you have to pay attention to. I can only imagine on a site the size you were working on. It's
Yeah, so I use Screaming Frog as a desktop tool,
yeah,
right? But I would it would fail. It would fail on this website.
I'm
The
sure.
And I love the tool. I use it today. I use it with a bunch of my clients in my own work. However, with this website, we use deep crawl, which was fantastic. You can set it up. You can create the weekly, monthly, whatever was going to be crawls. You can see the crawl over crawl. You can see where things broke. And for a website like this, and this is true of any website anywhere, there's no owner of the SEO. There may be someone who talks a lot about it ad nauseum, right? Like this guy. But the idea of doing that is to get everyone to understand their place in terms of this thing that we call SEO and did you SEO it, right? Like it's such a terrible phrase, but did you SEO it? Well, how that relates to images is did you just grab it off of iStock and dump it up? Well, that's an image for print. What does that mean? What's that going to do to your website in terms of file size? You do that 5 times, you're going to kill Google. So you need to be able to learn SEO from your own perspective. And so we had a wonderful technical team. They knew the value of SEO. The entire company knew the value of SEO. So everyone was well aware of what it meant. And we had a very cross-functional company where folks would get educated on everything everyone was doing. It was really quite fantastic.
Couldn't agree with you more, man. I can't tell you how many times we've, delivered a site audit and the subsequent repairs we did. But the first thing is, okay, we've fixed all the images and gotten them to the proper size. But mark my words, this problem will literally happen tomorrow if you don't deploy these changes to your standard operating procedures for how your whole content team does images, or else you're going to call me in a month and say that we have images that are, too large or something like that. So that buy-in, I mean, otherwise you're just fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, I had a client tell me once, well, can you QA the changes? I said, I don't understand. Everything is laid out clearly. Is the document not clear? Oh no, the document's really clear. But my problem is I don't trust the people who got us into this situation to QA their own work to get us out of the situation. Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. Thanks.
Hey, you mentioned crawl budget earlier, and it was on my list of things I wanted to ask you about. What sort of tips can you share with us about crawl budget, optimizing crawl budget? Again, at the size you were at, I'm sure some things don't apply to smaller sites, but nonetheless, you've got to have some great insights into how to maximize the amount of pages Google can crawl at a time,
Yeah. So I would start with this was the biggest site I worked on up until that point in my career, and it still is. And so I had a lot of working theories. I studied, I went to the conferences, took all the notes, applied them as per my websites at the time, whichever website I was working on. This was the first website where I could work on it and actually apply my theories. So, and see what would happen, because I would say, well, chances are if we do this, this is what's going to happen. So the reason I bring that up is it's at play, right? I was just able to prove those things out on this website, but they are at play with other smaller websites, right? They may not be as critical, but they're absolutely at play. So in terms of crawl budget, think about it this way. If you have 100 pages on your website and you have some amount of duplicate pages because your URL string, because mixed cases, because there's another subdomain out in the world, whatever the reason is, Google's only going to get to so many of those URLs. And some of those URLs are going to be duplicate pages, which means it doesn't get to all the other good pages. So you need to keep your technical extremely clean. Make sure your 301s are 1-to-1. Make sure you limit your 401, your 400s. Make sure you only have one website. Is it HTTP? Is it HTTPS? Is it www? Is it non-www? It doesn't happen a lot these days, but I do find, and this is part of the technical audits that we do, I do find that there's more of these older items that typically don't show up. They do find their way into the system. So folks, and a lot of it is the server you choose today. So a lot of folks should take a look to see what's going on to make sure that they have one URL to host one piece of content. And that's an overly simplified statement, but that's the idea.
There's a lot of, we'll call it, errors that get reported in Google Search Console. Smaller sites don't tend to flag quite as many, but as your site gets larger, even into just maybe 500 to 1,000 pages and above. And while we're talking, I just pulled up Google Search Console for one of the larger sites we work on, and I'm seeing, and this is a site that, is not being ignored, right? But I'm seeing redirect errors, excluded by no index tag, page with redirects, not found 404, alternate page with proper canonical tag, crawled, not indexed, discovered, not indexed, et cetera, et cetera. Which are the big ones that people should be paying attention to, small or large site?
Yeah, it's a terrible answer. It's a trick question and a terrible answer, right? So
It is a bit of a trick question. You caught me.
Yeah, it depends, right? So I'll bring up a couple examples that I've seen more recently. I think it's more relevant to folks who are going to be listening. So we've been producing a lot of content for one of our clients, and the first 30 pages were great. The next 30 pages less great. The next 30 pages not as great. Digging into Search Console, seeing some of their old pages on the website, they're not great. They have not been crawled. They've not been indexed, or maybe they've been crawled or indexed. Either way, they're not getting traffic. It's not. I'm sorry. It's not indexed. It's been crawled, not indexed.
Crawled, not indexed. Yeah, and that's one of them. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and what it is it's a bunch of terrible content. It's not good. It's duplicative. It doesn't serve the intent of the page, and so what that does, it essentially drags down the value of the other pages we've been creating. So you have this imbalance of quality, where a little bit of good pages was great, but if you want to get the credit for these newer pages you're producing after the original bunch, you got to do something about this thing over here, because it's bringing down the weight of things. So that's take a look. If you're going to see a bunch of, there's some natural lag, and everyone has it with very good websites from what I've seen. There's a lag of some amount of pages not getting into the index. I don't know what it's about, but it seems natural. However, if you start to see patterns, if you start to see things in bulk from this perspective, crawled, not indexed, most likely a quality issue, or there's some type of redirect at play. There could be something that's not ideal. The other thing that Google Search Console is good for, but also not good for, is it gives you a sample. And Google's trying to show you patterns. So while something will show up in Search Console, it may not be an issue. It just happens to fit a pattern from their perspective. So soft 404s used to be one of those things before they had the actual category for soft 404s. Right? There would be pages that show up as 404s. I'm like, it's not a 404. Why is it, right? And so it would be, well, because it's a thin page. It thinks it's a 404 in some way or another. So even if it's a pattern and it doesn't map to what Google is saying, chances are you should fix it, because it's a problem for Google. So take it seriously, see what you can do, and just make sure you get it out of that Google universe, and make your site healthier.
Yeah, great tips. Okay, back to the website, back to dmv.org. We've talked a lot about your first year or two there, and really what you were focusing on. What did you guys do to get the growth, and maybe in subsequent years to get it to where it was when you did leave? I think you said 185 million, which is, yeah. I mean, that's approaching 13, 14 million page views a month.
It was pretty fantastic, and it took a while to kick in, right? So for the first year-ish, it was only up a little bit. Going through the archives, just going to refer to my notes here. We went from roughly 85 million visits to 95 million visits year over year the first year.
10, 12%.
It's not a lot of growth. I mean, it is. It's also not. And from that point, it started to really increase because the technical. It's really what it came down. The first couple of years, I attribute the technical to being the growth. However, after that, literally every page on the website was scrutinized, was rewritten, and just simply made better. We also, and I mentioned it earlier, we took search.dmv.org out of the equation. So search.dmv.org essentially crawled and scraped everything on www as its own website. And it would be found for very strange things. So I'm going to make up a terrible example, because I'm good at mixed metaphors and terrible examples. If one page had blue and another page had giraffe on it, and you search for DMV blue giraffe, this website would show up. Search.dmv.org would show up, right? However, so other than just a bunch of nonsense that it could rank for, the only thing that it would rank for was by default, because of how it's created, was anything on www. which means it was competing with www.
Right.
It was just a weaker version of it. So we took it out of the equation.
This is
And
the
that
type
meant,
of cannibalization that is bad. I mean,
yes,
there's theories about whether cannibalization really actually is bad or not. This is an example where I think no matter which side of the fence you sit on that argument, this is a bad example of where, because you have one page that's clearly weaker than the other.
for sure. Yeah. If your dilemma today around cannibalization is I have two pages that rank for the same term, enjoy it while it lasts, fix the
Great.
problem when it shows up. Yeah.
Right.
But for this was clearly scrape our own content and create a website out of it. What are we doing? We're competing with ourselves. So we took it out of the equation, and that gave us a huge bump as well.
Okay. Okay. You talked about how you went back and just every page was heavily scrutinized. What were the type of things you guys were doing to take it from a thin page? I'm using air quotes for those people who are listening, from a thin page that wasn't of high quality and improving it. I'm just interested, like, what were the things you guys were paying attention to? What were the things you were doing to bring the page quality up?
Yeah, it fell into a few categories. One was simply pages that didn't exist. Like I keep bringing up the Hawaii snowmobile insurance. Like it's not a thing. So if it's really just not a thing in the world, remove it. Just take it off the website. There were also a bunch of articles that weren't relevant. One of which was, and I kid you not, was about how to cheat the HOV lane and cheat. Let me rephrase. We weren't encouraging people to cheat the HOV lane. However, we reported on folks using a dummy in the seats, in the passenger seat, to cheat the HOV lane. Right.
I'm guessing that might have been a heavily searched term.
Yeah, and if you could imagine the blow up dummy from the movie Airplane, that was the image in the article. So we're going to take that out, right? So there was a lot of thinning out content that just wasn't applicable, and we had a process for doing that. So this may be helpful to dig into a little bit. So we had a concept that we kicked around. It was called aboutness, and it's exactly what it sounds like. What is the site about? So we had to determine what we were going to write about and what we weren't going to write about. We're going to maintain certain content. We know it's core to the company: how to get your license, how to get your registration, et cetera, et cetera. But then there was a bunch of all good ideas in the spirit of brainstorming that would show up, and people expected their ideas to be acted on. Well, it has to fit a certain framework. So we created an aboutness framework. So our definition of aboutness was an engagement with the DMV before 30 days before and 30 days after. It was a visit, but sometimes in some states, people get a piece of mail, right? That's what happens in California. Do you want your registration for your car? You bet. Here's the check, and I get it in the mail. So it was an engagement with the DMV. So if it mapped to 30 days before, 30 days after engagement with the DMV, it was part of our aboutness, and then it would still have to be scrutinized.
Smart.
But what we weren't going to do, if you can imagine a bullseye, right? This is the focus of the website. It's about you and your car, and then it balloons out from there. You could, because you and your car, you could argue driving gloves were part of that equation. Well,
Yep.
it's not. It's too far out. Too far out, right? So what are the, you need to define, we defined the rings and then went further out from there to understand what was in scope and what was out of scope for us. So for folks building their website today, like, not every good idea is a good idea. You should have a theme. You should be known for something. And using dmv.org as the example here, if you were to run that website through the three query types: navigational, transactional, and informational, well, as soon as we got hit by an algorithm update, because we are not the DMV, we lost all navigational searches. They were just gone. We outranked the California DMV and a bunch of other DMVs on the daily, and then we didn't. And that was the 40% drop overnight. So if you don't want to lose navigational / branded queries, you need a brand. You need to stand for something. You need to be the guy or the company behind X, Y, and Z. If you dilute yourself too much, or if you use generic terminology, chances are you're not going to be known for anything, and you don't have a brand. So it's a long-term play versus, we'll say, SEO tactics.
It's great insights. I think that applies to almost every website at every level as you are mapping out where you're going.
For sure.
I really want to get into this story of what happened a week after you left, but I have one more topic I want to ask you about,
Okay.
and then we'll get to the crazy drop in traffic. Monetization. We haven't talked monetization, and I've been holding off on it on purpose. I want to hear about how you guys monetize this site and any insights that you learned through. I mean, my goodness, the testing that you must have been able to pull off with that kind of traffic. I'm just sure that you guys really had some great monetization going on.
We had a very talented team, and so we did a lot of things well. Monetization was one of them. We had a gentleman who was running our A/B testing, conversion optimization, did a great job, fantastic job. But here's an important thing to note with this website: we never took a single credit card, not once. It was all through partners. It was a content play. It was an information play. We wanted to help people with their task. Also, sometimes helping people with their task is giving them the chance to transact with something as it relates to their task. So there are companies out there who will sell you cheat sheets around practice tests. So you can download their cheat sheets, you can take the practice tests, and we partner with those folks. There's other folks who will help you get your passport when you're in a pinch. Other folks will help you get your license when you're in a pinch. Your registration when you're in a pinch. We partner with those folks. So everything was a conversion off the site, and we just partnered with a bunch of folks who had good products.
So a lot of affiliates, basically. I mean, to put it in brass tacks.
That was it. We were essentially a super affiliate because of the amount of traffic. You know, we could broker deals with folks who really wanted to be in our universe because of the amount of traffic that we got, and we had a vetting process. And if we had a partner come in on a Monday and they stayed 30 days, whatever it was, we weren't shy to challenge them with someone else who said, "I bet I can beat them." Okay, well, let's see if you can. We had the traffic to get to statistical significance to see what it would look like.
Yeah.
Was it partner A or partner B or ad A with versus ad B, whatever it was, we were able to do that pretty well.
Any tips on things you learned from running these tests at scale? I mean, I know comparing two different vendors is just a standard A/B test, but more practical kind of high level insights that you might have learned from anything from call to actions to placement to locations to the design. I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm not trying to
I mean,
tell you which ones.
Those are all relevant, 100%. One of the biggest battles that I recall internally was wanting to call it too early, because the lines would start to go in certain directions, and people are like, "It's obviously clear. Take a look. It's been a week. We have it." And the conversation was, the time doesn't necessarily mean that we're significant. You're seeing the timeline. That's not hitting the math we want. So let's give it another week, another 2 weeks. We need to hit this number. And so once we hit significance, then we had our answer. But there was always a gut reaction to if it was, a huge delta between the results to call it early. And that's just not how it's done. You shouldn't do that.
I have an undergraduate degree in econometrics, so the nerd in me wants to spend the next 3 hours talking about this, but it would just be me and you at the end of that. That's great, though. That's really good. I think that, I mean, you guys obviously had a strong affiliate play. You mentioned the car insurance. You mentioned all the different opportunities you had to partner with people. You also mentioned earlier that you started lacing ads into that. When did you guys put ads on the site? And was that a pretty big win, or was that kind of a subservient to the affiliate income that you earned?
Yeah, it was late in the game. I want to say 2017, 2018, something like that. My recollection at the time was it was mixed, because there were some partners that would take a hit, but overall we would have more. I think the biggest benefit was that it diversified our traffic or our revenue sources. However, I don't know exactly how much it cannibalized or minimized partner relationships. That wasn't my department, and I would be speaking out of school to give a firm opinion on it.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, there's that debate that lives on, but I mean, I'm sure that, like you said, the diversification was probably a big win, even with some of the drawbacks.
Yeah, I do know, like, if you're working with AdThrive, one of these companies, and you go to put ads on your pages, they want to know, because they want the prime positions, right? That, like, at above the fold right here, where all the eyes go, we want our ad there. We're going to make a lot of money. You're going to make a lot of money. What's the value of this call to action? You should know the value of that call to action before you replace it or challenge it with a banner ad, a display ad, because those guys should be able to tell you out of the gate, we can't meet $100
Mm.
for whatever the metrics are. Like, our math does not beat up your math. We know that it's never going to. Or you should know that maybe the math will beat up your math, and then test your website.
Well, let's talk about what happened the week after you left. And I mean, you left the site in 2018, 185 million page views a year at that time. I keep going back and forth. 185 million page views a year, but things changed about a week later.
Yeah, so we got early signals. I think it was in July of 2019. I'm sorry, July of 2018, where we were doing some amount of paid search, and our ads stopped getting approved. We weren't able to work as efficiently as we could with Google paid search. We talked to our rep, didn't really have any good answers, but it became a constant issue. Ads would show, things would get approved, they would not, then they were paused. It wasn't working out. I believe it was September of 2018 where we got about a 15% demotion in SEO. So that was noticeable for us. When we started to dig into where that came from, it was largely around the agencies that had good sites, the agencies that had budgets, California, New York, et cetera. So a better website beat out our website in that scenario. I remember talking to one of the executives, and he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, it's either an algorithm change where Google is deciding that we're fundamentally not the DMV and we shouldn't be outranking them. It's one of the two. We just don't know.
Yeah.
One's something we write out, and the other is potentially catastrophic. So, right.
I was going to say, you can't change. I guess we'll put that under the Google's bucket of, I guess, search intent in that if they decide that search intent is for them not to land on your page, you can't SEO your way out of that.
Well, I mean, I shouldn't have a website called Ask Jared if people want to talk to you, right? Like, it fundamentally doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense. And I say that firmly believing what we did was a service. We did make things easier for people to navigate. 100%. I was wearing my little badge at one of the conferences one day, and they're like, I love your website. You were able to help me register my car. I had no idea, but then I read your website. Fantastic. We did help people. And we're also not the DMV. We shouldn't be outranking them. So come January of 2019, I got the phone call or the text from my former manager, and he says, yeah, so it's been less than a week. You've been gone, and we lost 40% overnight. And I picked up the phone. I called him. I said, so, like, are you kidding, or what's going on? No, I'm not kidding. This is not something I would kid about. 40% overnight. Okay, well, let's take a look. Did you push something and it didn't work out? Like,
is this that darn Canonical issue again?
Yeah, right. Who doesn't know the technical? But when it comes right down to it, it was Google saying you should not be outranking the state agencies with navigational or branded terms.
And so you lost all navigational queries.
Yes.
And that was the 40%. Yeah. Was there any effect on the informational queries? Did Google still want to reward you as a helpful result when people clearly weren't trying to go to the DMV, but were trying to learn about DMV topics?
Yeah. So think about it this way, and things changed over a couple of years, right? But it took a couple rounds for Google to really kick this website out of the algorithm because of the history, because of all the links, right? They sort of had to do something with their own algorithm to target this, is my theory. Yeah. Right. So when this change came through, I was taking a look at dmv.org, dmv.com, socialsecurity.org, right? So all of these government agency names, not with .gov at the end of it. So .org, .net, .info, whatever it is, with agency sounding name. And they all got demoted to page 2. So somewhere I think is a line of code that says if sounds like government and doesn't sound like and doesn't end in .gov, get out of the way, right? Get out of the way. And so if it was a navigational query, California DMV, at least at the time, it was California DMV 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera. They intentionally took up the space. They wanted to push everyone down, which they've said at least once or twice, we want diversity in the search results. We don't want the same site showing up more than once. Well,
Except,
sometimes, yeah, sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's not true. So we were able to rank better for. They were at this point. They were able to rank better for informational queries, and things sort of normalized out. But over time, based on what I'm seeing, there's this long tail of losing traffic. It doesn't mean it's not still a viable business. It just means it's not the business that I knew that I worked in.
you sent over a screenshot in our back and forth.
Yeah.
A dubious honor of sorts to be included in the, I believe it was the quality rater guidelines for Google, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was sort of funny to see that, and it wasn't explicit around a website per se. It was in the context of local, but the quality rater guides, to my knowledge, had never anything about the DMV before then. And magically, after this website gets chopped off at the knees, there's a sort of a subtle hue to it.
It was subtle. It was subtle, but
Yeah.
after the hour we've spent talking, I'm not sure how subtle it really was.
Well, anyone else will look at that and go, okay. But when you're in it, you go, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, now I get it. Yeah, it's basically an inclusion of talking about intent, I believe was the best way. Google's addressing how a quality rater would understand search intent, and they happened to use DMV as an example, which ironically that example showed up subsequently right after a lot of this demotion happened.
It's some funny timing, that's for sure. Yeah.
I mean, at one point, this site, I think you said, was in the top 200 websites on the web in terms of traffic. It was,
it was.
Absolutely killing it. It's you haven't been involved since 2018, 2019, so obviously not a lot of insight since then. But from a high level, I mean, it sounds like this site did so many things right, and not really by a fault of its own, kind of got put back into where the new Google landscape has them, right? And I think if we just take that story as an aside or as a high level, I think a lot of site owners might be in a similar situation with so many Google updates, right? And it's hard to understand if you got penalized in an update versus maybe Google just taking away traffic from you that they no longer think applies to you. They can feel the same, but
Yes.
maybe speak into that a little bit if you could. Your thoughts on if there are any differences there and how site owners can kind of process through a lot of these algorithm changes that are happening thick and fast now.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on at this point. One way to take a look at it is, do you have a brand or do you not have a brand? Right? You should be known for something. You should have an identity tied to yourself. If you're going to, I'm going to be harsh, and it's not entirely accurate, but from one perspective, I think it is, given the 40% drop. If you're going to masquerade around as something that you are not, then you should expect the consequences of that, right? Just that's what this evidence speaks to. So if your website is bestcarinsurance.org or something like that, it's a query. It's not a website. That's not a company. It's what some, right. It's not a brand. So if you want to do that, I mean, maybe it's a short-term thing. Maybe you're learning from your experiment, but I would not hang my hat on it at all. Fast forward to just a couple of weeks ago, AI content looks really good, looks really intimidating from a content production perspective. So what's going to happen with that? And there's going to be some checks and balances around how do we sniff that out? What does it mean? Is it quality, et cetera? And even before that, part of the strategy of ranking in the top 10 is what did they do? How do I do what they've done better? And how do I add, here's the most important part, how do I add my own specific take on it? how do you actually make it better, not just grab the 5 subcategories they mentioned on the one page, rewrite it better, no typos. I mean, sometimes a little bit better is actually a lot better.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's a crowded space and you better have a brand or else you're not going to be found next week. You need to stand for something. There needs to be a reason why someone has an affinity towards you and your website, or else you are just playing the Me Too game. You're just another candy bar on the shelf and you just may not get chosen at some point.
Whew. Those are good words, though. It's a lot to unpack there. It's very true, though. Nick, this has been amazing. We could have gone down a lot of rabbit trails and learned a lot, but I think that your story is just fascinating. There's so many gold nuggets there, and congrats on that. I didn't say it earlier, but congrats on the growth. I mean, if you look at it percentage wise, it's one thing, but if you look at it in terms of the millions of page views that you added, that is just an insane number. So congrats on that.
Thank you. It was a ton of fun. We had an awesome team.
Yeah, what a fun ride. Hey, you're doing SEO nowadays. Where can people follow along with what you're doing, and if they want, maybe get in touch?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you. Opticsin.com is my agency. We're a small SEO agency. We provide content, technical audits, links. We do all the SEO things. Also provide some coaching around folks who want to do it for themselves. And the most recent thing that's exciting, assuming I actually do it, is I'm going to produce an SEO class in 2023 with the learnings from things like this from dnb.org to help folks who are managing a mature website, and for folks who are coming out with their own website, their first website, second website, whatever it is, to avoid those pitfalls, to fast track the learning so they're not swimming through a bunch of content. There's a lot of good content out there. There's also a lot of confusing content around SEO. So the idea is help folks get to their destination faster with this class.
Great. Okay, we'll get a link to that in the show notes. Nick, thanks so much for coming by, telling your story. It's been really fascinating to hear about the site and about all the things that you did on it. Thank you again.
Pleasure, Jared. Thank you.
Hey, Jared here. So if you have a website that is not getting organic traffic and needs SEO help, check out Stan Ventures. They are a full-service SEO agency renowned for their professionally managed SEO, blogger outreach, and powerful link building services. They've been helping websites rank their pages higher on Google for more than a decade now. More than 2,500 websites and 100 plus SEO agencies have experienced the true power of Stan Ventures. Their customer reviews mirror the quality of the services that they offer. If you're looking for a trusted SEO partner to do things that can really push your website to the top of Google rankings, look no further. Stan Ventures has your back. Again, they're a full-service SEO agency that can handle your SEO through things like blogger outreach and powerful link building services. Don't wait, you get an exclusive 30% discount on all of their services by clicking on the link in the description below.